How's it going? Adam Drake here, and today I'm going to share some information about runtime. So, with nitro vehicles, there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of different components that are all having to work together. And to be able to get good runtime, it's not as simple as just changing the Venturi. Obviously, some engines are more efficient than others. But there's a lot of small details that you need to pay attention to that can then add up to helping increase your fuel consumption or runtime. So I use obviously the OS Speed 83 engine, which has a lot of power, is very fuel efficient. But if you don't use the engine properly, some people may get less runtime, some people may get more. So I'm going to kind of run down a few steps that can make a difference, and hopefully these are things that you can try or work on to be able to improve the runtime with any engine that you have. So we'll start with the vehicle's drivetrain. That can have a big play in how efficient the runtime is. You want to have a car where everything is super free. If stuff's bound up, that's more force that the engine's having to push. It's not going to be as efficient. Just like if you have a truck, if it's loaded down or you're pulling a trailer, you get less fuel consumption. So you want to make sure that the drivetrain is good, ring and pinion is shimmed properly, and then just some vehicles are more efficient than others. Some have a slightly heavier drivetrain, or maybe their ring and pinion's not cut quite as good, to where it's not going to be as efficient from one car to the next. Next thing that I notice a lot of times when I'm tuning people's engines is the carb opening. So when they set up their radio and their linkage, a lot of times they'll have the radio set to where the carb is just opening too far. So you have the Venturi, you have the slide, you want to make sure that the slide is always opening to the end of the Venturi, or in some cases even slightly less. If the Venturi is opening, or if the slide is opening past the Venturi, you're basically just wasting fuel. You're also going to lose a little bit of that feel. You want it to always be 1-to-1. So when you're at 10% throttle, you want 10% of the output. When you are at 50 or 100, you want 100%. You don't want, when you're at 100% on the trigger, to be opening 125%. That's just not going to be very efficient. So you'll always want to make sure that, again, the carburetor is opening to the Venturi size and not anymore. Now, speaking about Venturi size, that also can have a big impact on the runtime or the efficiency of the engine, but it's not always what you think. So you would think smaller Venturi allows less air. With less air, you less fuel, so you're going to increase runtime. In theory, yes, that's how it should work. Smaller Venturi should give you more runtime. But if you have a smaller Venturi, it's going to also reduce the overall power or the speed that the engine's able to output. And in some cases, that will make you drive much harder. So if you're opening the throttle more, you're using more fuel. So you need to have that proper balance. I almost always will start with a 6.5 Venturi, and on a lot of tracks, I'll end up running a 6.0 Venturi. Again, 83 has a lot of power, and if I feel like I need a lot of power, then 6.5 will provide that for me by running the larger Venturi. If I then use less throttle, it can actually be more efficient and help with my runtime. In conditions where it's overpowered and I want to be able to drive a little bit smoother, kind of manage the wheel spin, go to a 6 mil, sometimes that will also increase my runtime. So these are things that you just kind of need to try and see what works best for you, but don't always think that smaller Venturi is always going to guarantee more runtime, because it's not always the case. Next thing is the air filter. I see a lot of guys, and even myself from time to time, like on my Truggy, every now and then I'll run a Kyosho air filter because it allows a little bit more air, so it gives it a little bit, allows it to breathe a little bit more, gives it a little bit more top end, but it for sure reduces runtime. If you use a like the new MBX8R Mugen filter or the TLR style filter, it again maybe will reduce a little bit of power, but it's definitely more efficient than kind of the old school Kyosho style, or like what the old Mugen 90 filter is. So again, it's just kind of trade-off. Do you want a little bit more overall power, or do you want the efficiency? So more efficient is going to be kind of the S-bend style filter and boot. Also, the air filter foam and oil can also make a difference, because again, it's having the most efficient fuel system that's going to help give you the best runtime. So if you're running a filter that has like a super sticky oil, that's good because it helps keep dust out, but you need to have a balance of one that gives the proper protection, but without restricting the airflow to where it kind of chokes down the engine. I always use the Flashpoint pre-oiled foams and filters. The ProTech pre-oiled filters are also a good option. So again, make sure you use a good filter. Clutch is another really big thing that can help or hinder your fuel consumption. So if you're running a clutch that slips really bad, you're having to pull the trigger because you don't have the drive that you would prefer. As you use more trigger, slips more, it's not as efficient. The same can happen if you're running a clutch that is kind of bogging and lugging the engine down. You don't have the power delivery that you want, so you're having to use more trigger and again, using more fuel at the same time. Usually for buggy, I use the ProTech 4-shoe clutch. The Mugen 4-shoe clutch also works really well. And then for truck, I usually run either the OS 4-shoe clutch or the ProTech 4-shoe clutch. So with the clutch, you'll want to kind of tune for the track conditions and for the power band that you like. But the clutch can have a really big impact on the runtime and also how old the clutch is. So as the clutch wears, you end up having more stalls. So the clutch will engage at a higher RPM, which means you're kind of wasting fuel as the engine's starting to rev and the shoes are ramping up before they engage. So typically a newer clutch is going to be a little bit more efficient than a more worn out clutch. And then the biggest thing as far as fuel consumption, which is something that I think is sometimes hard for people to admit, is basically two things. It comes down to the tuning of the engine and how you drive it. If you go out on the track and you're just full wood and you're blowing turns and you're out in the dust, you're going to use more fuel than someone who is holding a tight line and driving really efficient, rounding their corners. But again, tune also can have a big play on that. In most cases, when I help people tune their engines, they're almost always rich on bottom and in the mid and lean on top. And that's going to be really inefficient. It's going to be fast on the straightaway, but it's not going to have a very good power band. So it's going to almost force you to drive deeper in the throttle out of every turn. And especially with a rich setting and then also using more trigger, that's just, again, not very efficient. It's going to use more fuel. If you can run a setting that is crisper, more lean, it's going to be much, much more efficient on bottom. And think about it, out of every corner or little rhythm section you're using, you're not always going to full throttle. So when you're doing those pulls that are from, say, 30 to 60%, so using the bottom and mid-range, you want those to be the most efficient. And on top, you're only going down the straightaway once per lap, where you're actually full throttle for, you know, a couple seconds or a fairly extended period of time. So you want to make sure, tuning wise, it's efficient. It allows you to then drive more efficient, and it's going to give you better fuel consumption. I wish that there was just an add-on piece or you know, one tip that I could say, do this and you're going to be guaranteed to get more fuel mileage. But again, it's all these things that I just talked about that add up. So you may gain 20 or 30 seconds from each of these things, but then when you put it all together, it equals 1.5 minutes. But again, you got to drive efficient. You got to tune the engine to be efficient. Don't overlook the small things like how old your clutch is, the clutch settings, your throttle high point, make sure that's set properly to where the carb's opening the correct amount. And then another thing is the type of fuel that you use. The nitro fuel that we run in these cars, it's not like the gasoline that we're putting in our full-scale cars. It's not like you can just go from AM, PM to a Shell station and it's, you know, basically all the same. There is a big difference in the fuels and also in the efficiency of the fuel. The Flashpoint fuel is a huge part of my program. It burns super clean. It has a lot of power. It's easy to tune, and it also has really good runtime. So again, hopefully this helps you. Hopefully you can pick up and test some of this stuff to help give a little bit of fuel mileage, mainly just so you have the comfort. A lot of times you'll see at some of these races, it doesn't make a huge difference because your tuning window, like say you're able to go 8 minutes and 30 seconds, everyone's pitting at 7:30 in most cases. So if you're getting 8:30 and these help get you the 9, it's not really going to be like a huge advantage for you, but it does give you a little bit more comfort and peace of mind. And then in some races, if you're at that 9-minute mark and these tuning tips can help get you to, say, that 10:30 mark, and you can drop a stop, it's going to substantially help you and improve your results.